In the spring of 1978, a federal water specialist drove into Lane County, Kansas, with a briefcase full of charts and a sentence every farmer in the room wanted to believe. There is enough water under this county to change your life. His name was Thomas Blevins. He worked out of Garden City. He was 38, sunburned, energetic, and on his 23rd county presentation of the season. The subject was deep irrigation from the High Plains Aquifer. The technology was no longer experimental. The money was no longer theoretical. From the air, the new fields looked like green coins dropped onto brown ground. From the banker's desk, they looked even better. Dryland corn in that part of western Kansas might give you 45 bushels in a decent year. Under pivot water, men were talking about 150. That was the room Thomas Blevins walked into on a Tuesday night in April. 43 farmers on metal chairs in the VFW hall. Coffee in paper cups. Dust on boots. Every man there already halfway in love with the future. All Thomas had to do was explain how to finance it. Low interest loans, favorable drilling terms, modern pumps, modern confidence. The deep water had been there for ages. The county could draw on it for a long time before anybody needed to start worrying. 40 of the 43 men signed before the meeting ended. One of the 3 who did not was a dryland farmer named Eli Voss. Eli was 46 years old, broad-shouldered, slow-spoken, and hard to impress. He had 420 acres north of Dighton, winter wheat, milo, a little feed corn, and 70 head of cattle on mixed grass. He sat through the full presentation without interrupting. Then he walked out into the parking lot without touching the pen. Thomas Blevins followed him. "Mr. Voss," he said, "was there something in the plan you wanted me to go back over?" Eli was standing beside a dented Chevy C20 with a cracked side mirror and binder twine hanging from the bed. He looked at Thomas for a second, the way some men look at a salesman when the pitch is almost too smooth. "Just one thing," Eli said. "How fast does that water come back under this county?" Thomas shifted his briefcase from one hand to the other. "Well, recharge varies, of course, but current estimates are under an inch a year in most places." "And how much does a full pivot pull?" Thomas answered because the room was over and the script was still in him. "In a heavy corn season, call it 18 inches, maybe more depending on heat." Eli nodded once. "So you're taking 18 out," he said, "and putting 1 back." Thomas started to speak. Eli beat him to it. "That's not irrigation," he said. "That's liquidation." He opened his truck door. "I appreciate the charts," he said, "for water that knows my name." And he drove home. That sentence is the whole story. Because the next Monday, while most of the county was calling drillers to chase a deep ancient reserve, Eli Voss walked to a low, awkward piece of ground in the southwest corner of his own farm that he had been studying for 9 years. It was 55 acres of land most men would have called a nuisance, a shallow draw where 2 slopes folded toward each other. The soil stayed dark longer there. Boots sank sooner there. In wet springs it delayed planting. In dry summers it stayed green after the uplands had gone gray. Eli had tried to crop it 3 times and regretted it every time. One June drowned his stand. One late planting got burned by an early frost. One year the combine barely paid for the diesel, so he quit trying to force it. That was the difference between Eli and most men around him. He did not need a piece of land to flatter him. He only needed it to tell the truth. For 3 years he let the cattle graze the draw lightly and watched what the ground did when nobody was trying to make it perform. In July heat, when the higher ground split and whitened, that draw kept color. In August wind, when the topsoil on the ridges loosened and moved, the draw still held moisture down below. There was water in that place. Not pond water, not recent puddling. Something slower, something tucked into the earth. The Monday after the meeting, Eli took a steel probe and walked those 55 acres in straight lines from fence to fence. The higher ground felt normal, tight loam, dry below the root zone. But the lower strip was different, easier penetration, sandier texture, dampness holding farther down than it had any right to after a dry week. That afternoon he drove to the extension office and asked for the county soils map, and an older geological overlay most men never bothered to look at. The map showed a narrow alluvial seam under the draw. Shallow gravel and coarse sand laid there by runoff and old drainage, perched above the deeper regional water. Small storage, limited yield, but local, seasonal, recharged by rainfall and slope wash from the very ground above it, not a hidden ocean. A cistern in the earth. Eli called a driller named Warren Sutter. "I don't want the deep water," Eli told him. "I want the shallow seam under the Voss draw. 30 feet, maybe 40. I don't need bragging yield. I need honest yield." There was a pause on the line. "Most men in this county want 800 gallons a minute," Warren said. "I want 12 that comes back," Eli said. Warren laughed softly. "That's the first sensible order I've had all month." They drilled in May. 38 feet, clean gravel, steady flow, 12 gallons a minute. It was not enough to feed a pivot, not enough to make a circle from the sky, not enough to excite a banker. It was enough to keep livestock alive, enough to fill a tank every day, enough to matter year after year if the seam kept recharging. Eli bought a used windmill head from an abandoned homestead south of Shields, rebuilt the gearbox in his shop, and set it over the well himself, with help from his brother-in-law and a borrowed hoist. Total cost, $610. That same summer, some of his neighbors signed notes north of $40,000. The laughter started almost immediately. The loudest voice belonged to a dealer named Wayne Mercer, owner of the International Harvester franchise in Dighton. Wayne sold tractors, parts, and pivot packages. He had the easy confidence of a man who had been right often enough to assume that history planned to keep agreeing with him. He held court at the grain elevator scale house on Saturday mornings. Eli Voss spent $600 on a windmill and a trickle well, Wayne said over coffee. "That's not a farm plan. That's a museum exhibit." The room laughed. Wayne lifted his cup. "Give it 5 years," he said. "The rest of the county will be farming in circles, and Eli will still be praying over dry dirt." Eli heard all of it. He answered none of it. Instead, he fenced the 55-acre draw and nailed up a hand-painted sign on the corner post. "Recharge Meadow. No tillage, no heavy traffic." That sign got him laughed at almost as much as the windmill did. Men drove by and shook their heads. A recharge meadow? What kind of farmer protects wet ground instead of trying to fix it? But that protected grass was the actual machine. Bluestem, switchgrass, side oats grama, roots driving deep, opening channels, slowing runoff, forcing water downward instead of letting it flash away. The draw was not waste ground. It was intake. It was the roof of the little reservoir Eli planned to live on. Meanwhile, the county boom took off exactly the way Wayne Mercer said it would. From 1978 to 1982, the money looked magnificent. Corn yields jumped. Land prices rose. New pickups appeared. Grain storage expanded. The elevator manager started talking about throughput the way city men talk about growth. Pivot parts moved so fast through Wayne's dealership that crates barely cooled on the dock before they were sold again. And Eli? Eli had modest dryland crops, no new machinery, and no irrigation note. He paid cash for a used grain truck, paid cash for a smaller tractor, kept his cattle watered, kept his debt low. People pitied him. That is one of the cruelest things prosperity does. It makes caution look like failure. By 1980, the first local water report came out. Dry language, thin stapled pages, easy to ignore. Eli read every line at the kitchen table under a yellow bulb. Static levels were slipping in the heavily pumped sections. Not disaster yet, just enough decline to make a careful man sit straighter. He got graph paper from a drawer and began marking the line, year after year. He did not need to be a hydrologist. He only needed to know what subtraction looked like when nobody was replacing what was being removed. He brought the report to the elevator once and left it on the counter. Nobody opened it. They were too busy cashing good corn. The first real crack appeared in 1983. Not collapse, just strain. A grower west of town noticed his pivot taking longer to complete a circle. Another had to reset pump depth. A third added horsepower because pressure at the outer end of the system had fallen off. Quiet fixes, quiet expenses, quiet embarrassment. Nobody wanted to say out loud that a machine designed for abundance was already beginning to feel distance. Eli updated the graph. Then came the dry year of 1984. His own crops suffered. Of course they did. He was not magically spared the weather. His dryland yields fell hard, but the county's irrigated men had to do something more dangerous than suffer drought. They had to replace the sky. The pivots ran longer. Wells ran hotter. Pumps worked harder. The county stopped supplementing rainfall and started trying to manufacture it. The line on Eli's paper dropped faster. He stood up at a district meeting that winter and asked the board a question no one wanted during a boom. At this draw rate, he said, what's the plan for when the shallowest pump settings stop reaching? The chairman thanked him for his concern and moved the meeting along. Outside, Wayne Mercer found him near the parking lot. You've been predicting the end since the beginning, Wayne said, and all I see is corn. Eli looked at him. You're seeing this year, he said. I'm trying to see the bill. Then came 1989, the kind of summer people in western Kansas still talk about with a changed face. April dry, May worse, June like a furnace door left open. By July, stock ponds were shrinking into black mud. The creek beds looked peeled clean, native pasture crisped underfoot. The county's pivots ran 12 hours, then 14, then nearly without mercy. The deep water had to carry crops, cattle, and panic all at once. That was when the boom system finally showed its spine, and it was not steel. It was depth. Depth meant longer lifts, lower pressure, higher costs, hotter pumps, more failures. Men who had built entire seasons on the idea that the water below them was effectively endless, suddenly learning that endless was not a physical term. It was a sales tone. By the third week of August, 2 irrigation wells south of town had lost reliable prime. Then more. One producer lowered intake and bought himself another week. Another could not afford the adjustment. Several shifted water away from livestock to protect the corn that still had a chance to finish. That choice kept the books cleaner. It did not keep cattle alive. The hauling started. Poly tanks on flatbeds, stock trailers retrofitted with barrels, round trips to municipal taps, 4 loads a day for some operations, hundreds of miles in heat that seemed to come from the ground as much as the sky. Eli's well did not become miraculous in that drought. It became exactly what he built it to be, 12 gallons a minute, steady, cold, local. Pulled from a shallow seam the deep crisis could not drag down in the same way because it was fed by the land right above it, not by some ancient reserve being emptied county-wide. The recharge meadow had done its work. The roots had done their work. The little seam had done its work. On the morning of August 18, 1989, Eli was at the windmill tower before sunrise, grease rag in one hand, wrench in the other, when he heard engines on the county road. One truck, then another, then another. He looked up and saw 3 pickups turning into his drive. Behind them came a flatbed carrying a tank strapped down with chain binders. At the front was Martin Hale, who ran 180 head west of the highway. Behind him was Dean Rucker from the quarter to the north, and at the back, in a white 1-ton with the dealership name still faint on the door, was Wayne Mercer. Eli stood beside the stock tank and watched them step out. Nobody spoke right away. The windmill wheel turned in the morning wind. The pump rod rose and fell. Water spilled into the galvanized tank with the same patient sound it had made every day for 11 years. Martin finally said it. "Eli," he said, "we need water." Eli looked at the tanks. "How many head between you?" 300 or so. Eli did the number automatically. Too many. Far too many for comfort. This was the hard part nobody romanticizes about being right. A small, honest system has limits, too. He could not save the county. He could only share what the county had laughed at. "This well gives 12 a minute," he said. "Not 600, not 1,000, 12. So if we do this, we do it by schedule." Nobody argued. Wayne Mercer had his cap in his hands. He looked smaller without the scalehouse crowd behind him. "My north well went dry yesterday," he said. "I've got 80 head with nothing left in the tank." Eli watched him for a second. This was the man who called his plan a museum exhibit, the man who sold circles to half the township, the man who laughed at the sign. "Back your tank up," Eli said. Wayne moved first. It took a long time to fill 500 gallons at 12 a minute, long enough for a man to stand in his own silence and hear what it says. Wayne came back the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. For 5 weeks, until September storms finally broke the worst of the heat, trucks came to Eli Voss's yard before breakfast and lined up beside the little windmill most of them had mocked for a decade. He never charged them. When Martin Hale tried to press folded bills into his hand, Eli pushed them back. "I'm not selling water," he said. "I'm passing along what the grass kept." That line traveled farther than any joke had. Later, one morning before sunrise, Wayne arrived early enough to catch Eli alone by the tower. No engines idling behind him, no audience, no coffee counter grin, just the 2 men and the sound of metal working in the wind. "How did you know?" Wayne asked. Eli wiped his hands on the rag. "I didn't know the year," he said. "I knew the math." Wayne looked out toward the draw, now fenced and pale under the dry sky. "All those years," Wayne said, "I thought you were leaving money in the field." Eli shook his head. "No," he said, "I was leaving water in the ground." Wayne laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "I sold half this county on something I never measured right." Eli said nothing. After a while, Wayne nodded toward the meadow. "That grass," he said, "that's the real pump, isn't it?" Eli looked at the roots, the basin, the slight green that still held where everything else had gone brittle. "Always was," he said. The county began to understand, but only because pain is a better teacher than projections. The next spring, a district hydrologist named Susan Carver came to Eli's place with aerial maps, soil sheets, and a legal pad. She spent 2 hours with him tracing draws, old drainage fingers, and shallow alluvial pockets on neighboring properties. When she published the district bulletin the following year, it did not pretend that shallow seams could replace irrigated row crop production. That was never the point. The point was resilience, backup livestock water, locally recharged shallow sources, protected intake ground, smaller yield, higher honesty. Within 2 years, 5 other ranchers in the district drilled similar shallow wells on qualifying ground. Not one used them to chase corn. All of them used them to keep cattle alive when the hot years returned. Wayne Mercer sold fewer pivot packages after that. Not none, but fewer. He changed his pitch. He started asking men where their recharge came from before he talked to them about capacity. It was not sainthood. It was belated arithmetic. Eli kept farming until 2005, when his knees finally joined the weather in telling him he was done. His daughter Ruth took over the place. The recharge meadow is still fenced. The sign is cleaner now, painted on steel instead of barn board, but it says nearly the same thing. Protect what fills what feeds you. The original shallow well still produces. The windmill head was replaced by an electric submersible in the late 90s because age eventually wins every argument with a pump handle. But the water source itself is the same. Same seam, same draw, same local recharge from the slopes and storms above it. The district still uses Eli's case in drought planning workshops, and the line on the regional deep water chart is still moving in the same direction he saw in 1980. Down. That is the part worth sitting with. Papers were not fools. The yields were real. The money was real. The green circles were real. So was the subtraction. That was Eli Voss's gift. He could look at a promise and still ask, what happened after the applause? He could look at a piece of troublesome ground and ask what it was trying to do before deciding what he wanted from it. He could tell the difference between a big number and a lasting one. Most people, when they think about success on a farm, think first about output. Eli thought first about continuity. And when the hard years came, continuity turned out to be worth more than spectacle, because the most valuable thing on a piece of land is not always the thing that gives you the biggest season. Sometimes it is the thing that is still there when the season breaks everybody else.